She got us nice race tickets one time.
See, besides you can see so much better. You got a straight shot right there.
Val, doing the drumming anymore.
Are you going to be playing the drums and drums?
No, I can't be here tomorrow.
Oh,
I've got another commitment, Friendsgiving, Thanksgiving.
very nice. I'll give it to you.
That was really fun. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. You had something on Facebook recently. You were in this gorgeous blue dress. What was that?
My sister's wedding.
Oh, nice.
She was great, huh?
Yeah, I thought that was spectacular. I kept thinking, where could they be?
We were in San Diego.
Really? Oh. How nice.
It's a lot. First time we were there, it's like, oh, stay in your place for 5 minutes.
So how was that? Was it comfortable?
Yeah, we had a great time.
Oh, good.
You know, everyone was a little shy,
Yeah.
but it was all good.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
So has she met your friends?
No, not yet. Mom's back now in New York, and my little brother too. Yeah.
So you're out there all by yourself? Did you really?
Are we good to go, Gumi?
Because you're
Okay. Welcome to our fall lecture series. Thank you for your patience. And I am so excited to have my friends Carl and Teresa Wilkens with us today. When I was in Spokane, Danelle and I got to know this family, and they are wonderful, warm, thoughtful, generous people. And you're going to get a little glimpse of that today as we look back in history at a time that was very difficult for many people, and difficult on a family level too. You'll see in the documentary, and Carl will even talk about it, it's one thing for an individual person to stay in an atrocity. It's another thing for a whole family to make this decision and navigate it together. And in that sense, this is Carl and Teresa's story together. I'm thankful for the family. I knew his dad as well. When I was in Spokane, his dad, John, and I would go and we would knock on doors and do Bible studies. And this whole family comes from a place of care and empathy. And his organization, Outside of My Shoes, is this idea: how can we move past the tribalism that is so prevalent within our society and start to gain perspective of connecting with people that have even done some horrible things? We'll learn about this throughout the series. But how do you get to a place of restoration after moments that are unimaginable? So I don't want to speak too long. We're going to have lots of opportunities to learn from Carl. But at this time, Carl, I would like to invite you forward. And tonight, what we're going to do is watch a documentary that shows, in part, his story. There's also some books in the back that you can Venmo Carl or give some cash as you have it, but it tells his story. And then I also want to just give an update too with Liz Thompson. She's here from Impact Hope. And you see that table in the background. Over the course of the weekend, we'll have opportunity to learn about how to support that effort as well with Impact Hope. But at this time, Carl, if you would just set up the documentary that we're about to watch, and then have prayer, and we'll get right into it.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Good evening. Nice to be with you. My wife said, anybody going to come out on Friday evening? And I said, oh, we might have 2 or 3. There's much more. Rwanda is always this mixture of the worst and the most beautiful. And tonight, as we watch this film, it is primarily the dark, dark days of the 3 months of the genocide. But as another Kevin, our filmmaker, was also Kevin Ekval, and I spent a lot of time telling this, working on how we wanted to tell this story. This is a film that we send to schools before I go and speak. This week I was at schools in Long Island and with teachers in Long Island, and last week in Phoenix. And so before I get there and we talk about relationships and we talk about choices, and then especially after the genocide, we talk, what does healing look like? They just get the kind of an overview through this film. So you'll meet 5 people in there, myself, my wife, a Rwandan colleague who worked with me during the genocide, Gasikwa, a lady from the American Embassy, 26 years old at that. We were all so young then. And a UN soldier. We wish we had more Rwandan voices, but we just didn't have the budget to go to Rwanda at that point to bring that. But the one Rwandan voice we do have, I know you'll really appreciate and fall in love with Gasikwa. There are, as I look over our audience, I'm looking for some of the younger ones, there are a few graphic images in the film. I always mention that just out of respect for the people who were killed, as well as for the audience. We tried to be honest in storytelling, but it's and so I just give you that fair little comment, just a few places in there. And it's really hard to talk about the history and the background. I think we'll afterwards, what questions you have, we might delve into some of that. Just at the beginning, you'll see a few sentences at the beginning. But this is not a story of one group who hates another group. This is really a story of political manipulation of ordinary, kind, generous people to see the enemy in their neighbor. So I think that'll be enough, and we'll roll that one now. Thank you, Gumi, and thank you again for coming.
This is Tango Whiskey. Do you copy? Tango Whiskey. This is 76. Go ahead. Some kind of disturbing things.
I think it was really interesting in Rwanda that when people were ordered to leave, for some people, the idea of staying didn't even occur to them. And of course, the killing going on around here, the smart thing to do is get out of here. Get those who you love and safely get them out of there.
The senior rebel official said the government forces and militia were responsible for the genocide of between 500,000 and 1 million people.
I spoke to several refugees who said There aren't going to be any Tutsis left in Rwanda.
But in every situation, we have a choice. I mean, the choices might be greatly restricted. There's people who'd like to take that choice away, and sometimes we'd like to give that choice to other people. But it boils down to really, we do have a choice. And lucky is the person like me who had somebody like Teresa standing next to me, making that choice together. Went to Africa the first time as a college kid. Came back to the States and fell in love. So as soon as I got married with this beautiful girl, 6 weeks later we moved to Zimbabwe. Our daughters were born there, so Africa just kind of got in our blood.
You know, I didn't give a whole lot of thought to what was ahead after I say I do. I knew he was an adventurous person, and I was excited about living overseas.
When we moved to Rwanda, our first projects were to build schools, working with ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency.
Yeah, I met Carl Wilkens in 1990. Time he came to be director for ADRA. Someone was surprised how American young have 3 kids faster than that.
We were excited to be able to raise our kids in Africa. And Rwanda, like other countries we had been in, was very welcoming. The neighborhood kind of took our kids in as neighborhood kids.
The kids would go to school, Carl would do his work. I'd take the kids swimming and on birthdays. We'd go camping. So it was very normal for us. We were pretty much untouched by the conflicts that were simmering underneath.
And we had 2 Rwandans working in our home, Janvier, the night watchman, and Anita, who not only worked in our home, but she lived with us. And so Anita just proved to be a really kind, thoughtful, she was great with the kids.
She would stay with us through the week. We had a room in our house with a separate entrance, and we grew to love her very much, like part of our family.
Beginning in about January 1994 is when we started to pick up the undertones of unrest. I was the person who was supposed to bring the Rwandan and Tutsi militaries together for various dialogues, and you got a sense that there was a tension between them. Some of it you'd expect, but other aspects of it, you knew that there was something unsettling.
We didn't know the word genocide in the months before, but we could tell there was a lot of tension, and there were rumors of pickup trucks with machetes coming in. And then there were massacres. 50 people, 20 people, 100 people. You know, I started to find out some of my workers were Hutu and some were Tutsi. Up until that point, I actually didn't know who was who, and they worked together in a way that wouldn't indicate that there was a problem.
There was enough of a counterbalance of those who wanted to see peace succeed that everyone thought that any of those attempts to foil the peace would fail. Of course, all of that was proven wrong when the plane was shot down, and then in the next 24 hours there was a carefully orchestrated plan that was executed.
What's going on here, huh? We got all the kids in the hallway and the television. This is April 7, and we're watching TV in the hall. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were woken up at about 5:15, 5:20 by a lot of gunfire and stuff.
The day after the plane was shot down, there was slaughter going on at an orphanage to the east, and we were talking on our ham radio with them, and they reported people coming onto their campus and people being killed there at the orphanage, and they were begging us to get help. Please send the UN. And so I managed, after quite a few attempts, to get the UN on the phone. The UN guy was really shook up, and he said they had lost control of the airport. And I'm like, what do you mean you lost control of the airport? You know, how does the UN lose control of the airport?
I remember looking across, seeing groups of mostly probably young guys They'd be carrying sticks or machetes. They'd be moving in groups of 6 or 8 probably, going from one house to another, and it was very horrifying to think of what was happening.
People starting moving around. What's going on? Afternoon, is a soda from Chikondo, from our area, must kill all the troops. That military who came, he put he put it for machete. That day he killed that young boy. Wow.
The term Interahamwe is a Kinyarwandan term. I believe it means something like those of us who work together. And they managed to work the idea that if they didn't kill all the Tutsi, they would be enslaved by the Tutsi, and that they were fighting in self-defense, that this was a duty of all Rwandan Hutu citizens. And that's how they were able to mobilize everybody to this very twisted collective insanity.
Towards the end of that first day of killing, a gang actually gathered at our gate. We didn't know about this until the next morning, but we found out that our neighbor ladies had come out, stood between the gates, stood in front of these guys with clubs and machetes, and they said, no, you can't go into our house. They started telling stories about our family, doing little acts of kindness. Basically, they said their kids play with our kids. We were shocked to find out that we had been targeted, but then even more amazed at the courage of these ladies. They risked their lives for us.
My first and only priority in many ways was finding out where every single American was and how we would get them safely out.
So it probably would be Friday evening. Teresa and I would start making the decision about what we're going to do, and especially about Anita and Janvier, who were targeted because of their Tutsi ID cards. The embassy had made it really clear that Rwandans could not be evacuated in the convoy, that would put everybody at risk. And so that option was out. Thinking that they could stay and barricade themselves in the house, nah, the house would be broken into and they would be slaughtered. And so really, there just didn't seem like many options, except if, I was able to stay, perhaps my presence would stop the militia. There was a huge respect for foreigners in Rwanda, a real valuing of foreigners.
His personality, his heart was such that there was no other option, because he saw people suffering and he can't just leave it and not do anything about it. For me, it's a matter of, can I stand with that?
My parents were visiting at the time, and I was really glad my dad could drive the family out so Teresa could be with the kids, but still.
I think Carl recognized it was a hard decision, not just for him, but yet we could be looking at the possibility of never seeing each other again.
The harder part of this decision was her part, definitely. Much, much tougher. For her to leave with the kids.
And I know at that point in time his thinking was, and I agreed totally. I knew as adjutant director, he's there for not just the development aspect, but for the relief aspect too. He's been already working in these camps. And so it just seemed that it wouldn't be right not to stay. The right thing to do is to stay.
I'll never forget standing by our bedroom window, looking out at the city, which is built on hills there in Kigali, and holding her and thinking, this is what it's come to, and this is the right thing to do. And so I'm on the radio now, and I was telling Laura at the embassy, I'm sending my wife and family to the American ambassador's home. Over. She says, what do you mean you're sending them? We're all leaving. Everybody, shredding documents, locking the doors, everybody leaving. Over. And I said, no, I'm not leaving. He kind of paused, and you don't have a choice. And yes, I do have a choice, and you can see this going back and forth. And finally she says, okay, then I need you to sign on a piece of paper that you've refused the help of the United States government to leave Rwanda.
And I remember thinking how incredibly hard of a decision that must have been to be separated from his wife and kids and make the decision to stay. He had the opportunity, because he had an American passport in his hand, to leave the country and find safety. And instead, he was choosing to stay and let the people that he loved the most in this world go on overland without him.
In leaving, I did feel like, we were abandoning him. And though he tells me he never felt abandoned, I just, when we're all leaving and you're leaving someone behind, you do get that sense that you're abandoning them.
A beautiful sunny day. This is Tuesday, and nobody can believe what is hidden by this beautiful sunny day.
Here you can see is the corner of our yard. This house over here is just on the other side of the street. You can see the hole in their metal roof from where a small rocket landed this morning.
There was a 24/7 curfew. The government said nobody is allowed out of their house. The only people on the streets were the people who were doing the slaughter. The pastor and his wife who had joined me, she would buy stolen food or propane bottle over the fence. It was a survival time those 3 weeks. How can we get enough food and water just to survive?
Electricity went off yesterday and it's so... Come in, Ma.
During those first 3 weeks, there were several incidents when soldiers came, wanted to know who was there. I mean, there was this time that we actually paid off the militia about $100 to save the lives of the people in our house. You just did what you had to do. Each threat, each challenge that came.
Fluffy doesn't seem to be bothered by the shooting. And Poacher up there, he's just looking all around and... What's up? That seems too close.
Oh, here's the whole bedroom radio station. So I think it was about the second week of the genocide that, it was really sinking in on me. I might not see my family again. I started thinking, I gotta leave some sort of record. And so I found some old medical lecture tapes that I'd gotten from my brother and started recording over these tapes what was happening.
Okay, this is Sunday morning, April 24, and should have a radio contact here with Teresa very soon.
I remember listening for her voice. There'd be static on the radio and stuff, and then I'd hear this sweet voice come over the radio. 7676, this is Tango Whiskey, do you copy? And I'd push the button and go, yes, Tango Whiskey, this is 76, go ahead.
Initially, when he wasn't out and able to move around, we'd talk for a long time. I think maybe up to a couple hours.
I would ask her at different times, are you still okay with the decision, is everything really all right? And trying to sense from 1,000 miles away through a staticky radio how she's doing. And she always just came back to me rock solid, like, yes, absolutely.
Usually we'd talk once in the morning and then again late at night when he got back. And no matter what the newspapers were saying, no matter what the newscasts were saying, I'd hear all kinds of reports about the horrible things that were going on. But just to know that he was doing okay and that he came back safe every night was huge.
Eventually, an announcement came over the national radio. The government was giving permission for people to come out and get a travel document, a laissez-passer. And so when I heard that word over the radio, I thought, okay, this is our chance. Because during that 3-week time, I was thinking, okay, I stayed to hopefully save the lives of these two people, but there's got to be more. The morning I actually left the house, I remember thinking, we've developed a routine, and this sort of feels like there's security here within the fence of our yard in our house. And now I'm venturing out, and I wasn't sure what I would find out there. I had talked on the radio to the Red Cross. I knew the killing was still going on. So yeah, it was with a lot of uncertainty that I ventured out that first day. It was great to have Pastor Soraya along. I really counted on his advice. And then to have Dawson, one of my ADRA guys. We had been through tough scrapes already. Backing the car down the driveway, I knew the first roadblock was less than 100 yards away. Fortunately, it was a neighbor, the tailor man, who was there. Strange to see him, instead of at his sewing machine, having a machine gun in his hand. But he wasn't too difficult. But there was another roadblock we came up to, and they were shouting, "Belge, Belge," as we drove there. They saw a white guy in the car, and I guess thought I was Belgian. And I said, no, I'm an American. I'm not Belgian. And
The guy says, good, there was a rumor going around that Belgians had shot the plane down. He says, because if you were a Belgian, and he kind of draws his knife across his throat and laughs. He says, this is what would happen to you. And, as we wandered through some of the neighborhoods, it was really strange. They were deserted like ghost towns. I remember this one guy sitting on a couch. They drug it out next to the street, and he had an old shotgun across his lap and a monkey on a leash. And there were little kids who were playing with Westerner toys at a few places. I'm sure they hadn't seen those toys before. And, stuff was drug out of houses and on the streets. It was apocalyptic. It was just really like a whole different world. Finally, we made it to the office of the government headquarters. And as we were waiting there, I saw a man walk in with a military uniform. The guy had a real presence about him, greeted people as he walked around. And as he came and talked to us, I introduced myself. And I explained that ADRA was still there. Not that we had much, but we wanted to help any way we could. And he said, well, yeah, there are some groups of orphans that are needing help. I can send you with my social affairs man to visit these orphanages, and you can see what you can do. It was strange that this man actually ended up giving me my marching orders. He's the one who, to a large degree, determined what I did for the remainder of the genocide. And he quickly put together the document I needed, the travel permit, signed it and stamped it. And I walked out of the office with this paper that was going to be so crucial to moving around the city. The first time I drove into Gasimba Orphanage there with Colonel Renzaho's assistant, I saw these little bumps in the parking lot in the dirt, they're fresh mounds. And I said to Damas, the director of the orphanage, I said, are those graves? And yeah, they were graves. They were of children, orphans who had died not from the active slaughter, but died of diarrhea, dysentery. There was no question we had to get water to the kids, but how are we going to do it? And who's going to help me? And I can't imagine doing this without my two ADRA men, Dawson and Gasigua.
That's when he came to my home. So he told me, Wilkens is still in here. Oh, that's good. How? He's working, he wants you to go to work. Oh, that's good. That's good news.
That was definitely a regular part of every time I got out of my house, get water to the orphans, get water to the orphans. And in between, try to find some food, try to find some medicine. The fighting sometimes was so intense, I couldn't venture out. But each time I was pinned down in the house, I would picture these kids with their little metal cup. They would line up when I got there with water, just for one cup of water. The dependability of Dawson and Gasigua during this tough time was just amazing. And both of those guys had people in their homes. Gasigua had more than 40 people that came looking for protection.
People to come to my home. You are coming. There's nothing, what can I do? I open, especially kids.
And he said when the Interahamwe would come to the place, he would give them a chicken. I mean, he had this little chicken farm, and he'd give them a chicken, like a chicken for a life. And as I got out and I started to meet both the players in terms of those orchestrating the killing, but then also meeting people like Damas at Gasimba Orphanage with his 80 that eventually grew to more than 400, you started to see places where opportunities where you could make a difference. So Teresa would send some money through the UN, and from the UN to me, and from me to some of the killers who were in charge of the downtown section of the city. They were my bank, and they would change the money to local currency. And then through some ladies at the market, I found out thieves who had a stash of powdered milk, and I'd make a deal and buy powdered milk from them. But then I couldn't take all the powdered milk from them to my house. They'd rob me. To the orphanage, they'd rob me. So I would take the powdered milk to Renzaho's office, who gave me storage space there. And it was a network of thieves and killers who helped me to supply the orphanage, and even the colonel providing storage space. Pretty bizarre.
I got here in late May, and by that time, most of the killing in the city was pretty well over, but there was still a lot of fighting. And there were a lot of areas where we found it very difficult to travel. And Carl's voice would come over the radio in the middle of the night, reporting in from these places that we were afraid to travel. And we just couldn't understand how he was able to get from place to place to check on his orphans, as he did every day, and still live. He went through the worst areas of town. And when I say worst, it was unimaginable, thinking back on it. I tried going through some of them in the daytime, usually with escorts and armed people with me, and still it was frightening. You'd be surrounded by craved people with death in their eyes, with all sorts of hideous weapons, homemade usually, clubs with nails. I still don't understand how he survived, or how he was able to do the things he did. Most of our people were just absolutely astounded at his courage and at his success.
There's this one water story, I still shake my head when I think about it. We had managed to come up with some barrels from a factory. I think they were syrup or something. They were gunky, they needed to be cleaned out. And the water point was just clogged with hundreds of people. So asking them, excuse me, while I clean these barrels, you know, it was like, that's not gonna work. And somebody pointed out that there was a faucet, a water tap down the road a couple hundred yards. And I said, well, won't there be long lines there? They said, well, there's sometimes sniper fire there, but you could check it out. And so I thought, well, I went down kind of cautiously. Sure enough, there were kids there filling up their own water jugs, and they all gathered around, Mzungu, Mzungu, you know, that's what they would call foreigners. What are you doing? And there was one older boy among them who spoke French, and so I could communicate with him. And I explained I needed to wash these barrels, and these kids all volunteered to jump in, and actually we formed an assembly line, and one little one put her hands in a funnel shape over the hole in top of the barrel, and someone else would pour some sand in and someone some water. Not too much water, we don't want it too heavy, and they would roll it up a little hill and back down, slosh it around. Someone else would pour it out, glug, 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 and then machine gun fire tore at the metal roof above us, and we all dove for cover, and I'm thinking, this thing can't go on like this. Somebody's gonna get hurt, you know? The kid who was the leader, he's like, no, just hold on, it'll be calm, and his influence really did have an impact on the other kids. And after a little bit, it calmed down, and back to your stations, and for probably 2 hours, I worked with these kids cleaning all of my barrels so I could haul water. And boy, it was hot and could have been just miserable work, but those kids made a game out of it.
This kind of experience, I think it could have just killed me inside. As you saw so much killing and the suffering and of the little kids, especially working with orphans. Down the street here, we were always concerned about their safety. One day a mortar landed in the front yard and it killed one. And the second one just took most of her shoulder off. So angry, you just want to kill someone yourself as you're trying to change the dressing on this little 3-year-old shoulder. You're peeling the gauze back, and she's trying to be brave, and yet she's crying. You're so angry at people, but then you see the courage in this little kid's face, and they're ready to just keep on. They're never going to give up. And so, if the kid's never going to give up, then you know you can never give up. And you just have to you keep going.
A lot of people share the same concern exposed to people in Rwanda, but not just anybody was willing to take the risk. I thought, well, part of it is that your personality doesn't shy away from things like this, as a lot of the rest of us do. Over.
Roger, roger.
So anyway, I knew it was more than just your interest in taking risks. Over.
I guess one of the things that when you talk about the adventure element here is I like a lot of different things. There's no question about adventure and things that I guess some people would think are dangerous. The difference with this situation here is it's just no games, and there is real pain that I don't know any deeper pain that we have here on this earth that people are going through right now, and then I experience kinda, I don't know if you'd say vicariously or whatever. The stakes are real. No blanks are being shot.
Time had gone on, and you thought this is going to end, it's got to end, but it went day after day, week after week, eventually month after month, and it still looked like there was no end in sight. And fear was so real, especially the first days. You don't want to die. You love your wife, you love your kids, you want to be reunited with them. But fear would stop you from doing what God wanted you to do. And so if you ask him, he overcomes that fear. So you say, okay, Lord, if I die today, you love my wife and kids more than me. You know how to take care of them better than I ever could. I want to be the one to do it, but I'll trust you. And once you kind of give up like that, the sting and the nastiness of fear is gone. And so many of us, me, everybody, we get sidetracked at times and we make these choices that are really destroying ourselves, destroying our brothers and our sisters. But when you choose to look for the right way in making decisions and in taking actions and doing something, you know there's a reason to be on earth, and you know that the whole world just hasn't gone crazy as it looked like here in this country.
One of the toughest days of the genocide started out just kind of ordinary tough. Gasikwa and I were trying to get water out to the orphans. We took our truck to the water source and filled our barrels with water and then headed towards the orphanage. And as we came in the gate, the young brother of the director, Jean-Francois, came out and he says, well, you're coming today as an answer to prayer. They were here yesterday, and the last day or two they had killed about 6 people at the orphanage, and they had just given the message the day before that they would come back the next day and kill everybody. They said, we don't care Hutu or Tutsi, everybody here needs to get out or get killed. He's not even finished telling me the story, and all of a sudden around us we start to see them materialize. Some start to come in the main gate, others are coming through the hedges.
So Interahamwe was crossing around it for that orphanage. Time we see Carl Wilkens is starting talking to each other. What's that Muzungu doing here?
This was the beginning of what became between 2 and honestly I can't remember, 2-3 hour standoff. The militia just didn't move. They kind of positioned themselves all around the orphanage, but as long as I was there, they seemed not to be coming in.
Kids was inside, they was afraid, they was crying, there was many people inside, the mothers and the fathers who hiding there.
I saw their leader drive by once. I saw him walk by another time. I said to Gasikwa, siphon the water out of the barrels into the reservoir as slow as you can. We got to make this process drag on as long as we can. But eventually Gasikwa was finished.
And Interahamwe was still there. That's wanted to move there, waiting for Carl Wilkens to go. And the Carl Wilkens also does wanted to go.
I remember talking, Mama Papa Zero, that was the UN humanitarian. Mama Papa Zero, this is Adra 1. Come in and yes, Adra 1, go ahead. And then my radio started beeping, indicating the battery is about dying. And I knew that they couldn't come really to my help. I mean, they couldn't get to that part of the city anyway. But I was just calling for whoever. I talked to Philip at the Red Cross, you know, come in, and Philip came in and says, hey, the director, Damas, is here in my office. I said, well, good, don't let him come back here. They're looking for him. And eventually, Philip was able to get a hold of the police, the gendarmes, and what kind of brought a pause in this standoff was a pickup truck load with 7 gendarmes come in the driveway. And their lieutenant gets out of the cab, looks around, military guy, used to sizing things up, and he comes to me. I introduced myself. I said, thank you for coming. Can you spend the night with the orphans? No, we're too outnumbered. Listen, this is, you know, he's a man of action. This is what we got to do. He says, I'll stay here with my men, but you need to get us reinforcements. At this point, the young brother, Jean-Francois, says, no, don't go, Wilkens. As soon as you go, they're going to kill us. Please don't go. And he starts to kind of get teary and don't go. And I'm looking at the lieutenant. Can I trust this lieutenant? You know, because some of the police had joined in massacres. So is this guy just wanting to get rid of me and he'll join the militia for this massacre? Or will he honestly stand there and hold them off? And I decided to trust him. I mean, it was a hard decision. It was, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was gonna vomit. Am I just trying to save my own skin, you know, or is this really the right thing to do? Trust this lieutenant, move forward. And I said, listen, Jean-Francois, I will go get help. If I don't get help, I'll come back myself. I will come back. And it just seemed like a pretty weak thing that I was leaving him with, a weak promise.
But I left. I thought, man, they could stop me at the roadblock right outside the orphanage and kill me there. Or maybe I'm going to hear gunfire as I leave. And, well, I didn't. I went to the colonel's office, and I knew he was out of town already, but I still went to his office. And I found the secretary there, and the secretary says to me, as if it's good news, well, no, the colonel's not here, but the prime minister's here. Well, they had killed the prime minister the second day of the genocide, and the extremists put in their own prime minister. And so the secretary's telling me, ask the prime minister for help. And I'm like, what? This is the one who's in charge of the genocide. Why would I ask this person? This just made no sense at all to me. But there's a lot of stuff that wasn't making sense. The prime minister, Kambanda was his name, came down the hallway. He's got a whole little entourage with him, and they're coming down the hall. I step out in the middle of the hall, kind of, stopping them, put my hand out, introduce myself. I'm Carl Wilkens, the director of ADRA, and he goes, oui, je te connais. This is going on in French. I know you, he says, and how's your work going? And I'm like, well, it's not going good. In fact, at Gasimba Orphanage, there's a massacre that's about to happen if it hasn't happened already. I just kind of blurted it out, and turns, talks, and he says, yeah, after talking with his guys, we know about that situation. Those orphans are going to be okay. Kind of like, well, okay. Thank you, and I shake hands, and moves on down the hall, kind of leaves me stunned there, and yeah, I don't know any other reason except this guy. He stopped the massacre. A couple days later, we were able to get the orphans moved out of that really horrible situation to a less horrible situation, and it just amazed me that this man who later will be convicted of genocide is helping me save the lives of these orphans.
When I think back to those days and try to remember as vividly as I can what happened, the strongest memory I have is of this deep, gnawing fear that just kind of ate away at your bowels every day. You'd wake up to the sound of gunfire. In the night, you'd hear the dogs fighting over the corpses. In the daytime, if you moved around the city, there was a smell of death everywhere. What made it possible to keep going was the sense that it would end. One day, it would end. And I can remember the day it ended very clearly. Went from a night of almost complete gunfire all night and quite a few near misses to silence. Sudden and frightening silence. And it was almost a day before we heard the first tentative sounds of life coming back. People timidly coming out of the Amahoro Stadium or crawling up from whatever holes they'd been hiding in, looking around, speaking quietly.
When the genocide ended, when the RPF drove the extremists out of power and out of the country, that first night was really quiet. It was almost hard to sleep, it was so quiet. And then it was just a few days before I was able to leave, climb into this Canadian C-130 and fly to my family to meet up with Teresa and the kids. And I remember touching down in Nairobi and trying to see out the window of this kind of cargo transport plane and stretching, where's my family? And actually not expecting to see them until I went through some sort of immigration or something. And I was so surprised when they let down the steps, of this cargo plane, and I came down and looked, and there was Teresa and the kids right there on the tarmac a few hundred feet away, and ran to them, and the kids running towards me, and down on my knees hugging and kissing, and up with Teresa and hugging and kissing. And
seeing that plane coming in, landing, and then watching him come towards us, the kids running towards him, and it was really amazing, more than what we'd been dreaming about all the days and nights before as it led up to that. I remember Mindy saying, Dad, you need a haircut. And of course for me, just hugging him and realizing, how he's a lot thinner than 3 months before. It was a really good reunion. It took some time to absorb the idea that, hey, this finally has ended, but it just was exciting to have him back.
just incredible memories of the beginning of like a whole new world, a whole new life. By many people's standards, I should have been slaughtered with those 800,000 other people who were slaughtered during this time, but I wasn't. I'm alive. And now I get to see my kids grow up and you know, at their high school and college graduation and whew, you have this whole new appreciation for life. Fortunately, Anita and Janvier survived. They've both gotten married, they have children. Interestingly, Janvier joined the military and has actually done 2 tours of duty in Darfur, standing up against genocide there in the Sudan. And Anita has 2 beautiful sons, wonderful husband. Tragically, she lost nearly everybody in her family. A little brother who was out of the country and a sister hiding in a convent survived, but parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, gone.
I remember, you know, talking on the open line back to European Command and to the State Department about Carl's decision, and many of the folks saying, well, did you accurately convey the situation? Does he understand, truly understand the decision he's making? And I remember, you know, saying back to them, he does, and that is why he's staying, because he believes if he keeps a presence there, if he keeps that mission open, that he can make a difference. I really wished, in hindsight, that we could have done the same thing at the American Embassy. And it is probably my greatest regret that we didn't keep the embassy open. At the time, policymakers said it was better to close the embassy down. Looking back now, boy, what a world of difference we could have made if we would have maintained that American presence.
Myself, who was fighting each other, is my brothers, he was there, sister there, but no one helped. But Carl Wilkens go to help some people, help orphanage. And I saw he changed my life for many things until now. To do good things, better than me to do wrong things. I saw people never help one another, and it was very painful my heart. Until now, how people run, how people died, no help one another, kill someone, no do anything wrong. He changed my life.
Is this good?
Yep.
I won't get everybody, but...
So at this time, I would like to invite Carl up front with us, and we can answer or ask any questions from the audience. And also, those online will have a QR code. And if you want to text in or put a question in online, we have Pastor Raven up front, and we can get your questions there as well. But Carl, come on up, and let's start to see if anybody in the audience has a question. Just raise your hand, and I'll pass you the mic. But I'll get it started like this. I like the title of your organization, World Outside My Shoes. How does that come together? What does that mean to you?
You know, after the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsi, we spent another year and a half in Rwanda. And then in 1996, we moved back to Oregon, and I worked at an Adventist high school, Milo Academy. And we would have weeks where we'd especially focus on God and connection. And one of those weeks, we called it World Outside My Shoes, I don't know, 20 years ago. And the idea was we're all wrapped up about the world inside our shoes, me, you know. It's about me. But to stop, and maybe just another way to say, you know, to walk in someone else's shoes. So when in 2004, a documentary came out on PBS, on Frontline, about the Rwandan genocide called Ghost of Rwanda. That 2-hour documentary was grabbed by teachers. This was just 10 years after the genocide. They didn't have anything in textbooks or anything, so they're looking for resources. And so when they saw that documentary on Frontline, they grabbed it for their classroom, and then they saw there was an American who was in that documentary. Since I was there, I was one of the people they interviewed. So they said, would you come to our school back in 2004, 20 years ago now, and speak to our students? So about 3-4 years later, after doing that a couple days a month, Teresa and I made the decision that I would start traveling to schools full-time. A genocide was going on in Darfur, Sudan at that time. And, you know, I remember thinking during the Rwandan genocide, I'm wondering, does anybody care? And now I'm anybody. I'm part of the world, and there's a genocide happening there. And so as we started traveling to schools full-time, we formed this little 501c3, little nonprofit, and we called it World Outside My Shoes, which really, nobody can ever remember the name, but but when I started traveling with students and speaking about this with students, I'm like, how do you start talking about something as horrible as genocide? And how can it be, connected to our world and the way we think? And I came up with that little phrase, genocide stems from thinking that says my world would be better without you in it. And it's a horrible phrase because it's sometimes in my mind. I don't want to kill anybody, but somebody cuts you off on the highway, and you're like, that jerk is going to get somebody killed. Get him off the highway, But actually, Tuesday morning, I was going to speak to a group of teachers on Long Island. I had the whole Belmore Merrick School District. And a lady kind of cut me off and slowed down real quick in front. And my initial thought was, oh. But then I've been talking about this for a long time. And I'm like, what if she's one of the teachers I'm going to talk to this morning, And when you become curious, you no longer are exclusive, because curiosity draws in. And so you start wondering, and sure enough, I followed her. It was the same exit. Then she's going left, and at the stop sign, she's turning right. I'm following her right into the parking lot of the auditorium where I'm going to speak. And it was all I could do not to follow her to her parking place. That'd be too creepy. But I get in there with an auditorium of 600 people, and I say, I know some of you out here drive Subarus, so I'm not pointing at anybody. But but this idea that, when we judge, exclusion is a natural thing. That's a result of judgment. But when we're curious, inclusion. So the idea, the world outside my shoes, is this idea of curiosity and inclusion.
Very good.
I think I wanted to just say too, Kevin, not to.
Yep.
You watch a film like this, and it's like, where do you begin? Where do you begin to ask questions or to unpack something like that? And sometimes some of our questions seem so small or trivial, maybe. Everything is small and trivial in comparison to more than 1 million people killed. How do we talk about that? And so one of the things that has become really clear to me over the years as I've been traveling to schools is that, yeah, we have to unpack the horrible part of this because it's true and that's part of the context. But what really changes us is not the horror and the graphic imagery and stuff. It's people who stand up against the genocide. You know, people like these neighbor ladies who were in front of our house, you know, when the plane was shot down. And didn't you love the drawings in this film? Oh my goodness. I just, like, every time I'm at a school and they talk, and I want to call Robin Stone. He was the artist, you know, and he spent so much time on we're like, Robin, we can't pay you. Our budget is just, no. He would work way above and beyond budget just to continue drawing. But then I can also show you a picture of two of the actual ladies who were there. And I love, you know, this idea that it is not big, tough people who save lives often. It's ordinary. I always joke that the meanest person in that picture looks like the baby. You know? And so this idea of how these neighbor ladies, you know, managed to, the guys who were there to kill our family, they're definitely, you know, in the fight-flight mode, what Dan Siegel calls the downstairs brain. And you try to talk to them about empathy or logic, and that's offline. They're triggered. But when those ladies started telling stories, you see, so for me, that's where some of these conversations are. They're unpacking the choices and the decisions that people are making and what's behind those choices and decisions. How is my friend Gasikwa able to greet these people who've come to kill the people in his house? How is he able to greet them with kindness? You know, how is he able to think about their kids being hungry and saying, hey, you want to take some chickens home tonight? Literally, the guy said to him, they were so shocked when he said that, they literally said, how many? And he's like, well, how many do you need? You know, you see how it moves from this enemy to actually their neighbors. And Gasikwa, I would put forth, got them out of their downstairs brain by kindness, acts of kindness. And we have to get to the downstairs brain in a hurry because that's how we survive. You go there in a heartbeat, but it takes a little longer to get back up in the upstairs brain. And in Rwanda's case, and this is where I'll stop and see if you have some more questions. In Rwanda's case, there had been a war for 3 years before. Okay, wait a minute. This was not the set that yeah, there we go. There was a war for 3 years before the genocide. For 3 years, people were running to their downstairs brain. You know, our country's under attack. There's not enough. And the more time, we know that's how habits are formed. So you say, how could you get a neighbor to see their neighbor as an enemy? Lots of time in the downstairs brain. Lots of fear. Lots of what sells the most online? What gets the most clicks? Upstairs brain stuff, downstairs brain stuff. So, Kevin, I don't know, you can help me. What else would you like to unpack? We won't stay long tonight, but I'm sure there may be. Please, I see some hands back there, Kevin.
Yeah, I see a question from Norman.
What's the backstory on the animosity between the two groups?
Okay, good. Let me try just briefly touch a little bit on the history, okay? So the late 1800s, Germans are there, colonialists, you know, and after World War I, everything's taken away from Germany, and Belgians are there in Rwanda. They find there in the top right corner a Tutsi king. Now, the Hutu and Tutsi speak the same language. You can't tell the difference between a Hutu wedding or a Tutsi wedding, you know, cultural things they share. Historically, the Tutsi were seen as more cattle people. The Hutu is more agricultural, you know, stationary, nomadic kind of things. But the Belgians will take these wealthier people with cattle, a king, somebody who has lighter skin and finer feature, looks more like the Europeans, and they'll give them first choice in schools. They'll give them first choice in jobs. Catholic Church is really big, along with other churches, in colonizing and things like that. First training as a priest. So that priority, that privilege that was given, not to all Tutsis, but to enough, will breed hatred and animosity. You know, this last summer I met a researcher in South Africa. She'd been speaking with her doctorate was on the leaders of the genocide, and you know what their backstory was and how they could do and lead all these kind of, I'm still learning about her PhD, but she interviewed one man in a West African prison. He'd been convicted in Arusha, and then once you were convicted, they went to different prisons around Africa. And this man told her that as a 7-year-old boy, his dad had taken a message to the leadership. I'm not sure if she said chief or what. And I don't know the details, but it ended up with his dad being stripped and beaten in public. He says, I will never forget that, what happened to my dad. So this, you can say that people were historically discriminated against, a nice clean sentence, or you can talk about a kid watching his dad get stripped and beaten. Never forget that. And this desire, this drive to regain dignity, to regain respect, to regain who we really are created, but unfortunately we strive for that in very destructive ways. So this guy was not sorry at all for what he did during the genocide. It was the most powerful time in his life, he said, the time with the most influence, the time that, you know, you will not take that away from me, he said. Now, that is some historical background, but at the same time, they're marrying each other all the time, left, right, and center. It's not unusual to have Hutus and Tutsis marry because we are wired for connection. We're not wired for killing. And so when independence comes in 62, sorry, I forgot to turn the thing off on my phone that it goes back to sleep. Bear with me for just a minute here, and I will get that turned off, and it won't happen again this evening. Never. All right, here we go. When independence comes, the Belgians are trying to align more with the Hutu, the majority. You can see on their ID card, the Belgians make this, the first line inside the ID card is your ethnic background. You know, after that, you've got your place of birth, your date of birth, your profession. But Hutu, which would be about 80% of the people, is crossed out here. So this person would be Tutsi. About 10, 12% have Tutsi ID cards. But then and then maybe 2% have Twa. I don't know how many naturalized. So maybe then when a Hutu and a Tutsi marry, well, the kids will get an ID card of whatever the father has. So the ethnicity is really not, it's becoming less and less, I don't know, a deciding factor in life, except when the Belgians kept it active for school, for privilege, for opportunity. So when independence comes, instead of the majority now having power saying, we are all Rwandan, we're done with this division of the colonialism, you know, they're like, no, you Tutsis had your turn, now it's Hutu power. So many of the Tutsis will flee before, at the time, around this time of independence, many will be killed. Some will stay and hide and be protected by their neighbors. Those who fled, I'm sure they thought they'll come back home in a month or two when it settles down. Nope, 10, 20 years, they're not allowed back. They will get, as refugees, they'll be in Uganda. They will join a movement in Uganda to get rid of, you're an audience old enough to remember Idi Amin, if you understood some of the Africa history. They'll join a group who will get Idi Amin, drive him out of power, put Museveni into power in Uganda. And then with that military training, they'll say, we're coming home to Rwanda. And so they will in the fall of 93, we moved there in the spring of 90, in the fall of 90, the RPF, these are mostly refugee soldiers, I guess you could call them. The Rwandan Patriotic Front will launch an attack on Rwanda. There'll be a 3-year war. Finally, the Rwandan government will say, okay, you can come home, you can be part of the new government. But a relatively small group of extremists will say, no. We will never share power. To share power would be worse than defeat. And this small group of extremists, when the plane is shot down, will say the Tutsis killed our president. You know they've been we should have killed them all at independence. If we would have killed them at independence, we wouldn't be dealing with them now. They live next to you. They're among you. Those soldiers, they killed our president. They're coming for you. And who do you think will be sympathetic to the soldiers? Any of the Tutsis who remained in the country all of these years. Any Hutus who are sympathetic, they'll also be driven out. And so I could go on with that part of the story, but that's a bit of the background that's there. But it is, as I kind of wrote for you here, this isn't a story of Hutus who hate Tutsis. It's politicians recognizing weaknesses in society, exploiting those weaknesses in society to stay in power. And I try not to be so long in my responses, but there was another hand.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent explanation, Carl. Luca.
Hey, thanks for coming. And any of you, we totally get it, need to head out tonight. Do not feel bad at all. And like Kevin said, if you wanted, I made tapes, as you saw in the film. And so the books, actually, Teresa, I left them in the suitcase. Would you mind just putting a few on the table? We suggest if you have $10 or anything like that, you could do that. Or there's a website in the back. You could make a donation or anything like that. But if you wanted to take a book, or they'll be around tomorrow too, please feel free to take a book. And thanks again for coming. I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name.
Hello, sir. My name is Luca. So my father came to this country because of the war in Bosnia. He was a Bosniak, during the when after Tito died and it fell apart. And he said that during 2020, during the protests, he recognized a lot of similar kind of events unfolding that happened back home for him. And I talked
that he was recognizing here in America.
Well, let me finish. Sorry. But I talked to a Serbian man that I used to work with, and he said he kind of echoed the same notion. And I'm worried now with the election and the idea of Project 2025. Do you see similar makings as that of unrest that you saw in Rwanda? And if so, how do we prepare for it?
I will go back to this simple statement. It's not just simple. But I would say that when you can no longer see a neighbor in a neighbor, and even more importantly, see our family in the neighbor. When we can't see our family, we begin to see what we're most afraid of. And so I don't ever want to predict this place is at risk for genocide or anything, but I said, look, during the first Trump presidency, we all knew we were greatly divided in this country. And there seemed to be very little progress in healing and reconciliation. And then in the years following his, in the Biden presidency, people were hoping that there would be some healing. That still wasn't happening. And now here we are again. How can we change the course? Nationally, I don't know. But personally and individually, I'll come back to this idea of my friend Gasikwa. Didn't you love in the movie when it's people came to my house? I'm like, yeah, come in. Like it was just a rainstorm or something. But in reality, his wife had a Tutsi ID card. His kids were at risk. The local government guy came to him and said to him, I don't know if I can protect my wife, because he was a Hutu, the local government guy in the neighborhood, and his wife was I don't know if I can protect my wife and kids. Will you? And Gasikwa, of course, come in. And so this idea of kindness. But, okay, I know I would love to have a nice, clean formula for you. And I don't, but I was just showing my wife, I couldn't believe I wrote this about 4 or 5 years ago. And then I want to dig into this more this weekend. So forgive me if it feels like we're hearing it again later in the weekend, because I'm still trying to get this in my head. But I was pretty blown away, because I thought this was something that's just kind of been renewed in my thinking in the last since January, mostly in this year, I've been thinking about, you know, is my core rotten? Did God create me with a rotten core? Or is my core an extension of the heart of God? I wrote this about 5 years ago, and I hadn't looked at it for a long time. And this is from my journal, and in my journal, I highlight and do stuff like this. You know how the atmosphere surrounds and embraces our planet? Well, love is the atmosphere that surrounds and embraces every human. I'm exploring if it might actually be flowing from the inside out. We are designed and wired with unconditional love at our core. Now, I understand, I don't want to get into arguments of sinful nature and all of those things at this point, but my problem right now is if I believe that my core is rotten, it's like a welcome mat to shame. Now, I know Jesus is here to rescue me, and boy, I know I'm starting to feel a little warmer right now because I'm getting on for some people some difficult place, and I'm trying not to argue or say this is right or wrong, but when he says, I am the vine and you are the branches, I'm feeling like this is really a journey of Christ in me as an extension. And then I start to see that hard and harmful things happen to us from the get-go that can block this beautiful, powerful love from sight and from fully influencing our thoughts and actions. However, whether we or others see it or not, unconditional love is always there. Surely goodness and mercy will chase after, not follow. The accurate translation is chase after you all the days of your life. And if I really believe that it is in every human just waiting to be discovered or uncovered, that really changes the way I look at myself, because when I feel filled with shame, I am never good enough. And I don't believe any others. And so this idea of, I won't go much longer, but I'm like, what if Adam and Eve would have said, God, oh my goodness, we've been waiting for you. You would not believe what we did today. Huh? Instead of running and hiding and shame coming here, there is, from my perspective, no place in the kingdom of God for shame. There's a place for guilt and letting us know when our thoughts and actions are not in love, in line with Christ in me. And so, honestly, for me, I'm digging into this idea more deeply to really believe that about myself, made in the image of God. But I don't want to get tangled up. I'm not a theologian. I don't want to necessarily get tangled up in some of the other things that we've actually thought have been believed for since Christ, and many of them are just a couple hundred years old. But we'll keep the discussion going. Thank you.
Thank you so
Kevin,
much,
Can
Carl.
I come back tomorrow, you think?
Absolutely. So let's give a little promo for what's coming up. And then also let's reiterate with the books. So at the back table, Teresa's going to be there. I also have a QR code that can go to directly with Venmo. If that's a little bit complicated, another thing you could do is you could give me the money and I can make sure that Carl gets it at some point if you don't have it on you now. Would that work?
There's a website too. In the back of the book, you can use the website. However, it's not.
$10 each, is that right, Carl?
That's suggested. If you have $1, whatever, it's fine.
Okay. Well, coming up tomorrow at 9:30, we're going to be back here, so try to be on time. The topic is winding your way to freedom from anger and bitterness, re-neighboring the young man who killed your husband and sons. How do you recover when this has been the atrocity that happens? That's at 9:30. It'll be fairly short. There's not a Q&A after that one. And then during the worship service, Carl will be having the sermon, Made in the Unerasable Image of God, Searching for the Heart of Christ in Killing Squad Leader. And then after potluck, everybody's invited to that. We'll have our final presentation on the parable of the vineyard workers in Rwanda's creative pathway to moving beyond punitive justice to restorative healing, and more time for a Q&A after that. So with that said, we are so thankful for all of you that came here on a Friday night. For those watching online, I also heard there was a question about how do we use the QR code. we'll make sure tomorrow when we have the next question and answer time that we can have links right on the YouTube page, and we want to hear all of your thoughts and questions. But at this point, I'll close in prayer. We can have a few minutes to look at the books, and also a reminder, Liz Thompson from Impact Hope is here, and you see that booth out front. We'll have more on that tomorrow as well. But let's pray and then leave so we can get home before 10 o'clock. I know that we're coming from different places all over the city. Let's pray together now. Dear God in heaven, the lesson and the message to be able to see the human in our neighbor is one that we need to hear again and again. Help us to get outside of our own bubble and to see the image of God that exists in all people. Help us to be filled with your love so we can extend it to others. And as George Santayana, the philosopher, said, may we never forget the lessons of the past so we can continue to remember and have the impact for the day. Be with us now, and we pray this in your name. Amen.